All right, y'all, welcome to the 2025 Bay Mini Grant webinar and Q&A session. We are recording this, so please keep your cameras off until the Q&A and remain on mute. You'll have access to this recorded webinar anytime, just a heads up. Please hold your questions until the Q&A portion. Hopefully most of them will be answered through the presentation, but if not, we will get to it. So let's go ahead and go forth. Oh, and I'm Jessica. I'm the Community Projects Manager, and that's all you need to know. So this is our agenda today. We're going to run through an overview of the mini grant program, dive into the grant that's open right now, including eligibility, how to apply, new evaluation criteria, and we'll aim to get through all of this good stuff in 30 or 40 minutes so that we have at least 20, maybe 30 minutes left for your questions at the end. So everything we talk about today is on the website. So you can go ahead and go to that link if you want to, or just search Tampa Bay Estuary Program or Bay Mini Grant Program, and you can sort of check things out as we're going along. This is the basic overview, the basic information for Bay Mini Grants. We're going to dive a little bit more into most of this. The maximum project award amount is $5,000. The award type is like a reimbursement type of award where you spend the money and then you get reimbursed by us if you've received the award. The project length is 12 months, so starting January 1st, 2025, wrapping up December 31st, 2025. And the whole point of mini grants is to move environmental restoration and environmental education forward. So we want to inform and engage the public in what we're doing, all for the benefit of water quality, habitat, and wildlife in Tampa Bay. The mini grant program is managed by yours truly, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And in case you didn't know, it's actually funded by sales of the Tarpon Tag specialty license plate that you see here in front of you. So who is eligible to apply for a mini grant? Any registered nonprofit, grade school, community college, university, private businesses are eligible. Because this grant is intended to be used by the community, government entities aren't really the target applicant, but local, county, and state governments can apply if there's a strong community engagement piece of the project. Individuals cannot apply. You basically have to have a tax ID number to apply. Past award recipients, examples include nonprofits, educators, filmmakers, neighborhood associations, civic associations, student groups, artists, researchers, museum curators, all kinds of people have used Bay Mini Grants in the past. And if you're not sure if you're eligible, just ask us. I'm going to include some tips here in the presentation as we go. I might not read all of them, so just like check them out. You can go back through the presentation later if you want to. But yeah, just check on SunBiz before you apply. Make sure your tax ID is in good standing. Projects have to occur either within the Tampa Bay watershed or provide a really clear and direct benefit to the Tampa Bay watershed. But what is a watershed? It's actually an area of land that drains or sheds water into a specific water body, in this case, Tampa Bay. Rainfall that occurs within the red outline that you see there over the map eventually drains into Tampa Bay via creeks and streams and rivers and even man-made storm drains. And the watershed is nearly 6 times larger than the estuary itself. So those eligible groups that we just went over, you don't necessarily have to be inside the watershed boundaries. For instance, if there's a nonprofit whose office is in Dunedin or a business that's in the east side of Lakeland, they would not be in the watershed boundaries. But if the project were occurring in the watershed and directly benefiting the watershed, then that nonprofit or business could still be eligible. You would just want to make that super crystal clear in your application and reach out to us for some insight on that. Many past projects have focused on the Bay itself, so I personally would love to see more projects in the outer regions like Zephyr Hills and Plant City, Lithia, Bradley Junction. So if you work in those areas, I would love it if you reached out to me. And you can explore this watershed boundary more on our website. So let's go back to the purpose of this grant. Environmental restoration and education will be a little more specific in what we mean. Projects, this is the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan for Tampa Bay. We shorten that name, we call it the CCMP for short. This document contains a ton of information about what specific actions should be undertaken to restore and protect the Tampa Bay estuary. There are 9 sections from the CCMP listed on your application. Let's say you want to do a project where you educate boaters about the importance of motoring slowly on the Hillsborough River to prevent shoreline erosion or prevent damage to underwater plants or prevent injuring manatees. You might choose the Bay Habitat section of the CCMP. That's what you would include in your application as the CCMP goal that your project will address. And remember that you have to choose at least one of these. You could also choose the Public Education and Involvement section. Both of these are solid choices. You could include both of them on your application. Including both of them might make your application stronger, but you don't want to include anything and everything that applies. We know that everything is related in some way or another, but limit it to 1 to 3 CCMP goals in your application. Whatever you choose, though, just make sure you really clearly spell out which CCMP goals your project will address, both in your scope of work and in the questions that specifically ask about this on the application. So each year, a set of funding priorities is chosen for Bay Mini grants. You'll see with the new evaluation criteria that points can be gained by addressing this funding priority. Priorities are sometimes used to address an emerging issue or further a high priority issue, but this year we're trying a little something different by targeting specific audiences as the funding priority. These audiences are listed in front of you: businesses, school staff, underserved and overburdened communities, Indigenous communities, and veterans. The definitions for underserved and overburdened communities are in our the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's equity strategy, and that is linked in the application materials. You'll see it there. While these are funding priorities for the year, remember that anything in the CCMP is still eligible. So don't feel like you need to squish your project to fit one of these priority funding priorities audiences. You should just do you. You should do what you are planning on doing. And if it happens to overlap in this way, that's even better. This program has been going on since the 90s. So there's a lot of past examples to look at. These are a few of them popping up in front of you. You're welcome to look at past projects to get some inspiration or see what's been funded in the past. There's a link on the website that you can click to view past projects. I think some of the older ones just have the project name and who won the award, whereas some of the newer years have an actual short description and some other information on there. Your tip here is projects that combine restoration and education are more likely to get funded. So think about combining these two things in some way. And don't take these examples in front of you as gospel. You don't have to pick one of these and reinvent it or do the same thing again. We would really love to see new and unique ideas too. So we've talked about who can apply, what'll get funded. Now let's talk about how to apply. It's maybe a little bit out of order, but I think this order is going to be helpful for you. So my first tip for how to apply is review all of the information before you get started. We aren't going to go over every detail today, but you definitely should before you apply. And these are the steps that I recommend taking. Review the info packet or application materials. They're all linked on the website. All the materials are on a Google Drive, so you can make your own copy of the document so you can draft things as you move forward. There are several simple questions on the application document. You should make your own copy of the application document. Answer all of those questions in your own version, and then you can just copy and paste them into the online application when it comes time to submit. That's a screenshot of the application portal, so you'll have your Google Doc or Word doc copy those answers right into this portal. You're going to draft your scope of work. We'll go over that in a lot more detail. You're going to fill out your detailed budget. You're going to reach out to partners and a select few supporters maybe to compile letters of support, and then get any documents that you might need together. You might need a map if you're doing a physical project. You might need a quote or two quotes for a large purchase or something like that. Just make sure you go ahead and put everything together. Then you're gonna go back over everything and finalize it. You can, and I do encourage you to send me a draft of your application when you get to sort of this stage, or even if you're still in the idea stage, that's fine. Go ahead and send me something or set up some time with me to chat about your application. And last but not least, make sure you submit your application through the online form. September 13th at 5 p.m. is the deadline. When you're ready to submit your application materials, you'll copy and paste all those answers like I was talking about. You'll attach your scope of work, you'll attach your budget, you'll attach any supporting materials that you might have. Just like sending an email, you cannot make changes to it once you've sent it. So just make sure everything is exactly the way you want it before you submit. And there is a 30 megabyte limit on what you can submit in the portal. So make sure you're within that limit to avoid any issues when you're submitting your application. Make sure you don't wait until the last minute because late applications will not be accepted. And if you have questions about this or you're concerned and you're not sure, just reach out to me well in advance of the September 13th deadline. So let's talk about the most important piece of your application. The scope of work is really how you're communicating to the reviewers, the people who are going to review your application, what your project is all about. It should be thoroughly detailed, but not like overly verbose. So gotta sort of find the right place there. We receive 30 or 40 applications every year, so it's really important to keep your scope to the 4-page limit. For the sake of the sanity of our reviewers, who are all volunteers. So I'm going to pull up a scope of work template here, if Zoom will cooperate. No, why would it? Get out of the way. There we go. Okay, so we've got our scope of work template here. Let's scroll through it as we're going. So if I read everything on here, this webinar would be 5 hours long, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go over some of the main pieces. There are you've got your project title, your project goals, metrics, deliverables. We've got several examples of what that looks like here, just 2 whole pages of examples. So your goal is basically a version of the CCNP goal or subject that you plan to address. So for example, I'm going to scroll down to the second page here. Let's look at restore native habitat by installing oysters. If I need to zoom in more on this, somebody can come off mute and let me know because I cannot see the chat right now. So just give me a heads up. So the first example, restore native habitat by installing oysters. The CCNP goal listed is bay habitats in parentheses. So that's the goal, put oysters into the bay. But how will you measure whether or not you succeed with that goal? The success metric used in this example is install a minimum of 30 oyster bags. Great, that's a specific number, it's a specific action, it's straightforward. Now, how will we, as the project managers at the Estuary program, how will we know that you met your goal and your success metric? We need proof of some kind. So that's where the deliverable comes in. In this case, a map of where oyster bags were installed and photos of the oyster installation are included, and that is sufficient in my opinion, for a deliverable. So that's one example. We'll look at another one, educate youth on atmospheric deposition. So the goal here is water quality, that's in the parentheses there. The success metric is have 50 people under 25 years old attend an educational event. This success metric, it addresses the education piece, what that looks like. It describes who they're counting as youth, because that's not a very clear term. It gives a specific number of attendees so that we can say, yeah, 70 people attended their event, so they exceeded their goal, or only 45 people, young people, attended their event, so they're going to need to do a little additional work to reach the goal of 50 attendees. Then how do you prove that they've done what they say they've done? They can provide photos of the event. They can have sign-in sheets for attendees. It includes the attendees' ages. And in this example, they've also thrown in a digital copy of an educational video made for the event. So those are all acceptable deliverables. You are going to create your own goals. Metrics and deliverables. So whatever makes sense for your project is what you're going to put together. If you need insight on that, definitely reach out. You can use a table format like what we've done here, or you can just do bullet points, whatever works for you. Just make sure it's really clear and easy to follow. So after all these examples that you can check out on your own time, we've got our project timeline here. Since Bay Mini Grants are conducted over the course of 1 year or less, the timeline here is broken up into quarters, consisting of 3 months each. Here you're going to lay out what you want to happen in each quarter. It's totally okay to estimate. The timeline should include roughly how much funding you think you're going to use in each quarter, right here. And this section is meant to just help you frame your project over the course of the 1-year grant. This helps reviewers see that you've really thought through how you're going to carry out the work you're proposing. It helps you for planning purposes. And then below this whole section, lastly, we've got our project narrative right here. So this is where you really want to share a story. With the above sections, you've outlined your project. With the narrative, you can provide more detail, background information. You might say why you think this project is needed or how it will be helpful. Maybe even what inspired you to do this, or more information on the activities or success metrics that you've laid out. Tell the story of the project to really hook the reviewers and make a compelling case for funding. This entire scope of work should not exceed 4 pages. So the people reviewing your application are volunteers, as I've mentioned. Make sure to keep it concise while providing enough information. Include the detail and necessary detail to get your idea across and show how you'll execute it, but don't go crazy with tons and tons of pages. The reviewers will definitely appreciate it and it will work in your favor. So your budget is also super important. You should use the template. You should provide enough detail, but not a ton of information. Fill out every cell in this document that's applicable to your project. Matching funds are not required, but it does make your application stronger. Matching funds can come from volunteer time, donations, staff salary, a different grant, donated services, all kinds of things. So what is enough detail when we're talking about the budget? Let's look at some examples. For plants, you should include the name of the plant, the size, the cost per plant, the number of plants that you plan to purchase. This example here is the Dune sunflower, 1 gallon, $6.99, 20 pots. It's going to be about $140. Remember that any Bay Mini Grant, any plants used in a Bay Mini Grant must be native Florida species. So this is just an example of how you might do that in your budget. I'm going to show you 2 different ways of describing the same thing in your budget. So let's say you want 10 nice signs for your rain garden. You know how much the materials are, how much the labor is going to cost, how much the design of those nice signs are going to cost. You can choose to lay out the design in one row, materials in another row, and labor in another row. This is great. You're providing adequate detail. You're showing reviewers what the funds will be used for. It's really clear, straightforward. Another way of doing this, the same exact thing, is in this second screenshot. So design, materials, and labor are basically collapsed into one row, but the adequate detail is still there. Reviewers can see that each sign will cost about $90 to create and install. You should use whichever of these approaches works best for your budget item. Sometimes it's better to spell things out row by row. Sometimes it's better to sort of lump them together to give a more general idea. This is completely up to you as the grant writer and the project manager. The key thing is just to make sure you're providing enough detail for the reviewers. If any one item that you're purchasing exceeds $500, you should include at least 2 quotes for those items to provide the reviewers with a cost comparison. That doesn't mean that you have to choose the lowest cost quote, but you'll want to provide some justification why your renting a specialized piece of equipment for $850 instead of $700, for example. If you do get quotes for those more expensive items, just make sure you include them with your application. There are budget restrictions to keep in mind, and you should definitely read the information document provided thoroughly. The most common items you'll include in your budget are salary, mileage, and food, and there are limits for each of those. Mileage cannot exceed 10% of your budget, so, and it's got to be reimbursed at a specific rate, that $0.44 dollars, 44 cents, 44.5 cents. So if your total funding request is $5,000, that means only $500 can go towards mileage. If you're requesting $2,500, 10% would be $250 and so forth. Food cannot exceed 25% of the total budget. There are specific amounts that can be reimbursed for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's like $6 for breakfast, $11 for lunch, $17 for dinner, something like that. That's all outlined in your application information. Make sure to follow those rules because we won't accept, we won't fund something above those limits. One big change this year is salary in the Bay Mini grant budgets. We're not placing a firm limit on what you can request for salary in your Bay Mini grant budget. The limit used to be 10%, but we're getting feedback that that could be pretty taxing, especially on smaller nonprofits. So this year, there's no limit. However, just because requesting $5,000 for salary is allowed, that does not mean that you should. I'm going to recommend that you keep your salary request under 25% of the budget. I think that anything above that is not going to be competitive in the eyes of the reviewers. So do with that insight what you may. You can request $5,000 for salary, but you're probably not going to get that funded. If you are including salary for staff members, describe how and why they're involved in the scope of work, especially if it's not super obvious. You should include whether or not that staff person and their supervisor have agreed to this work. You don't want to be assigning work to people that haven't agreed to help. That's not going to help you succeed. So this is a blank budget spreadsheet. I'm going to pull up this is a blank one here, and that's in the application materials. Here's an example. So I'm showing you two different examples. This one is a pretty good budget worksheet. It's got all the items here with plenty of detail. It's got a rate for these items if they apply. The quantities are listed. The total cost is listed if they're actually requesting funds from the Bay Mini grant, or if they're just paying for it with matching funds of some kind, and the source of any matching funds is described. You'll also see that a Tampa Bay Estuary Program sign is included. We will provide that sign to you. If it's a physical project or event-based project, you can include that and put it in matching funds. That adds up to no more than $5,000. The math is all mathin'. It's all doing the right thing. So this is a pretty good budget. This is a not so good budget, starting with, there's no name, there's no project name here. You're submitting a bunch of documents. Just make sure the project name is on everything. Oysters, that's not really enough detail to describe what's going on there. Again, safety, insufficient detail. 40 or no rates given here for oysters. The volunteer lunch, the no rate is included. Lunch should not exceed $11 per person. T-shirts are giveaway items that are not allowed in Bay Mini grant funding, but they are included here, so that's not good. The salary exceeds 25% of the mini grant budget. Again, that's allowed, but not recommended. Food costs exceed 25%. That is not allowed. The budget is over $5,000. The match source is not described. So there's all kinds of issues. If you want to check this out and see some of the common problems that we see when we're reviewing Bay Mini grant budgets, feel free to look at that. Okay, so make sure to triple check your math. I know no one has a crystal ball, but do your best to estimate how much things are going to cost in January 2025. I know that's a good ways away, because that's when this work is going to start. It's okay to pad the numbers a little bit, to add a little bit to your items if you need to. Just make sure it's clear what you're doing. You can even include notes in your budget if you want to do that. There are some expenses that are just not allowed, so make sure those aren't included in your project. Clothing, lobbying, non-native species are not allowed. You should not buy materials before you've been given an official notice to proceed from me. Even if we have a conversation, unless you have that PDF that I'm sending to you, don't start buying stuff. You won't get reimbursed for items or services that were not included in your original budget. You can make changes, but that's something that we have to talk about and come to an agreement on. If a change needs to be made to your project, we can amend the scope of work and budget, but we definitely have to work together to figure that out. So don't just start doing stuff. So we've gone over eligibility, we've talked about how to apply. Now let's look at how your application is going to be evaluated. All applications that meet these requirements that we've already gone over the applications will be sent to volunteers from our community advisory committee for review. Reviewers will use these criteria to review your applications. Some of these criteria are new this year, so be sure to check it out. Even if you've gotten a Bay Mini grant before, things might be a little different this go around. Notice how many points are assigned for each of these criteria. I'm not going to read everything verbatim, but just make sure you're checking it out. 15 points for clearly demonstrating how your project will improve Tampa Bay. Your scope should really explicitly state how your project will address restoration, enhancement, or protection, or how it will educate the community. And remember that restoration plus education is a really good idea for getting funded. When reviewers are assessing the strength of your application, they're looking for a clear connection to one of the CCMP priorities like we talked about. They're also looking to see if the project time period, the outcomes, if they're realistic. Can you give these deliverables in 1 year? Can you actually achieve that in 1 year? They're also looking for you to clearly state your project goals, be straightforward, measurable success metrics, all that good stuff. The budget should be adequately detailed and all the items relate directly to the project. The project goals include enhancing science literacy in the business community. It's one of these funding priorities that we were talking about. You do get points for that. You can get 5 points for addressing one of the priority audiences. You could also include how you'll promote the Bay Mini Grant Program or the Tarpon Tag that I was talking about, where funding comes from. We want even more people to buy Tarpon Tags. So if you help us advertise that, you will get points in your evaluation criteria. So are you engaging the public in this project? Are you building stewardship in your target community? Make sure that is spelled out really clearly. Notice how many points are assigned for community engagement. This is a really important piece of the Bay Mini Grant Program. The next one is, when applicable, when possible, describe how you'll not only implement this project, but also how any maintenance or monitoring will occur past the 1-year grant timeline. For instance, if you're installing a rain garden, what happens to that garden in year 2? Who's going to take care of it? Are you planning to monitor the success of the rain garden? How will you do that? Just by seeing if the plant survived or not? And who will do that? So if you can address those things, that's even better. Also, tell us why you think you'll succeed. You can talk about past projects or other grants you've been awarded. If you haven't done anything like this before, that's okay. Talk about your history in recruiting volunteers or overseeing a team to carry out a common goal. There are some questions specific to this bullet point in your application document, and you can include details on how you answer that in your scope of work too. Funding projects in areas that are underserved, or overburdened, or projects that are led by communities that are in underserved and overburdened areas is really important to us at the Estuary program. So the Community Advisory Committee decided to actually assign points specifically for that this year. That's what this first bullet point is about. And again, the equity strategy is linked in the application documents. You should also describe the role of any of your project partners. don't throw in like a business or a university without telling us why they're involved, why they're listed as a project partner. And again, matching funds are not required, but having matching funds does strengthen your application. Lastly, let's work together to ensure all boats rise with the tide. If you've received a Bay Mini grant before, how will you use your experience and your success to build up others? This isn't a requirement, but it does help your application if you're one of those former awardees and you help someone else increase their capacity in some way. And just to make sure that the newbies aren't given a disadvantage to past awardees, we're also giving new applicants a freebie of 5 points. So you can say in the application that you've never received a mini grant before. So now you know how to develop a strong proposal, you know how to apply. Remember that applications are due by September 13th at 5 p.m. From there, volunteer review committee will take about a month or so to review everything. Then our funding recommendation will go forward to our board in November, where they'll approve or maybe not the funding recommendation. I will notify all applicants as soon after that November board meeting as I can, so you just have as much notice as possible. And then in December, project managers of that receive the award and I will work together to iron out all the paperwork. And shortly after that, projects begin on or just before January 1st. All funded projects require 3 quarterly reports and a final report. The deadlines are here. It should also be included in the project timeline of your scope of work. A reporting template is provided to y'all, so if you do get the award, we'll talk more about this later. So documentation, how you seek reimbursement, how often. You must submit documentation for your purchases. That means you'll submit an invoice and receipts in order to be reimbursed. A blank invoice template will be provided if you don't already have one for some reason. We request that you invoice us about once per quarter. You can do it less than that, but more than that's a little bit, we'll have to talk about that. It's possible. If for whatever reason that isn't feasible, if you need reimbursement more often, or you only want to seek reimbursement once at the end of the project, that's fine. We can figure that out together. You just give me a heads up and let's talk through it. All right, one quick review before we move on to questions. You can start putting your questions in the chat now if you'd like. We're almost to that portion. So who can apply? Nonprofits, for-profits, schools, governments, etc. What is the program? It's a reimbursement grant of up to $5,000 for eligible environmental restoration and environmental education. You should apply by September 13th at 5 p.m. And the work will take place in the year 2025. The projects are funded within the Tampa Bay watershed. The point of Bay Mini Grants is to engage and inform the public for the benefit of the bay's water quality, habitat, wildlife conservation, all that good stuff. And how do you get the grant? Well, if you follow these instructions, you recruit some great partners, you have a really good idea, you submit a strong application by the deadline to be considered, you're probably gonna have a good shot at getting funded. We do get a lot of applications, but we do fund a lot of applications too. So your last tip here is, like, we want you to succeed. It's our job to support you. So please reach out if you have questions or concerns or ideas, or you just want to throw some spaghetti on the wall and see what we think about it. We're happy to help work through things with you. So if you submit a draft application to me by August 19th, which I think is about 3 weeks before the deadline, I'm definitely going to get feedback back to you. The later you wait, the closer we get to the deadline, the less feedback I'm going to be able to give you. So if you want me to read your application thoroughly and give you some really sort of page by page insight, I will totally do that if you get it to me by August 19th. After that, no guarantees, but I will do whatever I can. Okay. That is it. So we're going to move on to questions. Yeah, I've already mentioned this. One last thing is, like, I know a lot of you are volunteers that are applying for this, or if you're staff, you're doing this on volunteer time. We really want to help you in any way we can, so please do reach out to us whenever. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and y'all are welcome to come off of mute, raise your hand if someone else is speaking, or throw questions in the chat. You can also turn on your camera so we can see each other if you'd like. And let's see, I think I saw something in the chat.
There's a question from Nicole. I don't know, Nicole, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Oh, I see it.
But yeah, she's asking for
Yeah.
guidance. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, I know nonprofits are eligible, but how can we best explain in our application that the public does have access to a site if it's on private property?
You can just include that in your scope of work somewhere. So in the project narrative is probably the best place for that. So you can say the site location is XYZ. This is technically private property, but the public is allowed free and available access to this, or just describe what the situation is. I would probably put that in the project narrative section of your scope of work.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I know I didn't do that good of a job. Y'all got to have some questions for me, so throw them on out there. Yeah, Lily, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm attending on behalf of the Rosebud Continuum today. I just had a quick question. So if we are still waiting to hear back on other matching funds around the same time that this application is due, or after we submit it, which might be slightly before we get feedback from other funds that we've applied to, will we still be able to update this after submitting our application?
You won't be able to update your application, but you can definitely let me know if and when you do get additional funds. What you could do in the budget is go ahead and put that in the budget wherever, whatever activity or item is most appropriate. Put the dollar amount in the matching funds column, and then in the match source column, you can say the name of the grant, maybe something like tentative, and the date that you anticipate knowing, so that we know it's not firm, but it is something that you're seeking.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and you could also include some of that detail in the scope of work in the narrative if you wanted to, like, we're also seeking other funds, it's in the budget, just FYI.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I have a question for y'all. Raise your hand or put it in the chat if you have never applied for a mini grant before.
Wow,
Cool.
honey, it's 6 o'clock already.
Lots of newbies. Love it. Cool. I'm glad you're here. I hope this was helpful. Please do reach out to me if you think you're going to apply. I would love to run through some things with you. Annie, did you have a question?
I do have a question, the public access portion of it. I'm in a community which is got limited access. It's not gated, but it's limited. And there are about 10,000 residents. Is that enough people to be able to, for public access, or does that disqualify us?
It depends on the situation. And so there is something within the stipulation is on public property, on a conservation easement, or has a direct impact on Tampa Bay. So that we have funded things that were on private property, but it's definitely a delicate situation, and you'd have to make a strong case for why the funding should go toward something that most of the public can't access. So it does not disqualify you, but you just have to make a stronger case.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Deborah and Pints of Science, do y'all have questions, or are your hands just raised from my question?
I didn't have another question. That was just from your question before. And I wasn't sure how to put it down, actually.
I can't tell you.
Okay.
You can make up a question. No. All right, you put your hand down. That's okay.
No, this was very helpful. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? The tarpon tag sign. Yep. Yeah, so we part of getting the Bay Mini Grant program out to the public and encouraging people to purchase the tarpon tag specialty license plate that supports this program is just advertising it. And one of the ways that we do that is sometimes putting a physical sign with with a QR code that says this project was funded by the Bay Mini Grant program. So if you are installing something physical like a rain garden or living shoreline or whatever it is, you can put that sign there. It's not required. It is totally optional. If you do put any kind of other sign there, we do ask that you mention the Bay Mini Grant program or the tarpon tag or something like that. If the project is not a physical location, like if it's some sort of educational field trip series or something like that, we can give you a sign just to take with photos, or we're working on getting a banner too. So just ways to sort of passively advertise the Bay Mini Grant program. We provide that so you don't have to pay for it. You can include it in your budget as something that does cost money, but we're paying for it. So it's matching funds essentially. I hope that makes sense. And if not, let me know. Are there any people here who have received a Bay Mini Grant in the past?
We have, this is Patsy Ugardi. I'm a master gardener in Manatee County, and we've received, I believe it was for a cistern that we replaced. That there may have been others. There are a number of us, master gardeners, and I'm not sure who all has been doing that. The project that we're considering is there's Manatee County, there's the Emerson Point Preserve. It's at the juncture of the Manatee River and Tampa Bay. And there are educational buildings there. The property was purchased by the state of Florida in the late 80s. It was turned over to Manatee County to maintain it. They have moved buildings onto the property for education, for restroom facilities, and they have done nothing for the gardens around there. Another master gardener and I, Sharon, we have been trying since 2017. We've gone out there, we've planted leftover plants from our plant sale, but there's no irrigation and there's no mulch. And so what we wanted to do was to try to get some funding and coordinate with the county. They would do the work to install the irrigation, and then we could filter the runoff off from the building, perhaps put in a rain garden, and just complete this project that we've been working on since 2017.
Cool. Yeah, that would be great. That sounds like a really good project idea. You probably already know this, especially since you've gotten an award before. Just make sure you submit a letter of support from the county, essentially saying, yes, this is on our property and we've agreed to it and this is what we're going to do, and that sort of thing.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Patsy, you might also reach out to the Sneed Island Community Group. It's like a group of individuals that live out on Sneed Island. I know they're always looking and doing different projects on Sneed Island, so they might be a good partner in your project and be able to help like water the rain garden, or just like help maintain it when you guys aren't out there.
Great idea. Some of the master gardeners do. Well, actually, the Emerson Point Preserve is located on Sneed Island, and
Yeah.
the Master Gardeners live out there as well. That's a great idea. Thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, of course. And if you do need additional contacts with them, let Jessica or I can drop my email in the chat and you can reach out to me and I can connect you with those folks.
Great. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Really? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, I just had one more quick question. So you mentioned earlier that in terms of partners, business and universities might require an FBA note. So I'm wondering if there's like a preferred type of partner for this fund.
No, I was just throwing that out as an example because sometimes people will mention we're partnering with whatever business, but then they don't tell us why or what kind of partner that business or that nonprofit or whoever is providing, if they're providing matching funds or if they're helping recruit volunteers or if they own the property. You can use any partner, and I think the more diverse types of partners is all the better, especially if they're one of the priority audiences that we mentioned for the funding priorities. But really anyone can be a partner. There's no preference there. You just want to make sure you say in the scope of work somewhere what they're doing as far as the partnership. Because if like Rosebud Continuum is applying and you say we're partnering with USF, but you don't tell us why, like just tell us why. And that's all I meant by that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying too. Other questions, y'all? I'll give you 1 minute of uncomfortable silence for people to think about their questions. Okay. Well, that was more like 30 seconds, but that's okay. Well, thank y'all for coming. I appreciate you being here. Please do reach out. Send me that draft application whenever you've got it put together. Check out everything on the website. Reach out with questions. And good luck. I look forward to seeing your application.